Hi everybody, my name is Esther Lessing and I'm the founder and director of Business Analysis Excellence. Today I would like to discuss the Babok technique with you, backlog management. Let me share my screen with you. Great, that's wonderful. So today we'll discuss backlog management. Just before we start, if you haven't joined the free Babok study group yet, simply visit baexcellence.com. We have quite a number of people already participating, and I share lots of discount emails with that group exclusively. I also have approximately 30 training videos in this study group available for you to help you get ready for your ECBA, CCBA or CBAP exam. There's quizzes, there's student notes, and all of that is completely free. I am the one that trains you, so I'm CBAP certified and you'll get to know me as you participate. And of course, we've got a wonderful community in the private Facebook group where people share ideas, they ask questions, and they simply support each other. So really don't miss this opportunity. Come join us. It's absolutely free. Okay, so let's now jump into the technique backlog management. So let's start with what is this? Now, first of all, you may have seen backlogs around your office or perhaps online or even in software tools. But the original backlogs would typically be a visual board that's up on the wall where often post-it notes or cards are used to manage work. Now, the definition according to the Babok Guide is that a backlog is used to record, track, and prioritize remaining work items. Now, you might say, oh, this is probably just for Agile. I'm not doing Agile, but it's not actually just for Agile. So this is a general technique that applies to different situations, and it's a really useful technique to be able to use in order to record, track, and prioritize any work that needs to be done within a project. So if you look at this particular diagram or image I've got here, you will see that they talk about the backlog sitting on the left-hand side of this big board. Now, this is typically the to-do list, and this is all the work that still needs to be done in a particular initiative or project. Now, this technique is all about talking, how do we manage all of the work that's waiting to be done? So let's have a look at what this is all about in more detail. Okay, so yes, let's dive deeper. Now, the term backlog occurs, or a backlog occurs, when the volume of work items to be completed exceeds the capacity to complete them. So backlog management, however, refers to the planned approach to determine what work items should be formally included in the backlog, how to describe the work items, how the work items should be tracked, how the work items should be periodically reviewed and prioritized in relation to all other items in the backlog, how the work items are eventually selected to be worked on, and then how the work items are eventually removed from the backlog. So let's now have a look at some of those elements that describes this in more detail for us. First of all, there are two things that you should know about a backlog. First of all, the priorities. So typically in a backlog, you will find that the items at the top of the backlog have the highest business value and therefore the highest priority. And these are also normally the items that will be next selected to be worked on. And then the concept of multiple backlogs does exist. So if you're working perhaps in a big initiative where there are high-level planning or program level work items being defined, as well as project level or lower level detailed items, you might find that these are two different backlogs that's being managed separately. However, they will have some integration and they will have some overlap, but simply just from a dependency perspective. All right, so now we can jump into the elements. So as with any technique in the Babok Guide, the Babok divides each technique in terms of elements that you should consider when you perform this particular technique. So let's have a look at items in the backlog, prioritization, estimation, and managing change in the backlog. So if we start with element 1, items in the backlog. So the question is, what items goes in the backlog? What is the types of things that you would manage through a backlog? Now, that you could do practically anything that has work associated with it. So within your team, you might decide on a subset of these items to include in your backlog, or you can simply say any work that we need to do as a team is going to be managed through the backlog. And examples of work could be use cases that needs to be developed, user stories, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, any designs, any customer orders, so anything specific around the customer, risk items that might be needing some work to be done on them, change requests, defects, planned rework that you need to do, any maintenance, or conducting a presentation even, or if you simply have to complete a document. So these are all the types of examples of work that could be put on the backlog. It is important though that you decide as a team whether it will be always one person that manages what goes onto the backlog. Or perhaps you might say, okay, we'll have a committee that decides what goes onto the backlog. Because remember that the backlog is effectively the work that needs to be performed by the team. So you shouldn't just let anybody add things as they see fit. There should be some process around who gets to put items on the backlog. All right, so now let's jump into prioritization. So ultimately, the prioritization is being done based on the relativity of priorities between the items on the backlog. And you know just as well as I do that priorities change, but you do your best with what you know at the time. Now, there might be a bit of a multi-phase prioritization approach going on, where in the beginning, you might just have a high-level understanding of certain items on the backlog. And based on that, it might be quite a broad prioritization. So it might simply be that certain items that has been defined gets prioritized as a high, medium, or a low item that needs to be looked at. So then what you might do is you might say, okay, all the high items that we've broadly prioritized, let's have a little bit of a look relative to those items, relative to each other. In a more detailed way, how does the priority sit? So you might say, okay, so for all of the category high items, we might break these down by using numbers of priority. So you might say high item number 1 is our absolute top priority of the entire backlog. High item number 2 is our second priority, and so forth. So that way you're able to manage some of the priorities on the backlog. Now, yes, we do have to keep in mind that stakeholders do change priorities. So you'll be continuously communicating and discussing any changes that might occur and agree it through a process that's been agreed on the project team. And then, of course, as more information becomes available, you will also discover more dependencies that might exist between items on the backlog. And this will mean that you may need to shuffle your priorities again. So the prioritization aspect of the backlog is a really vibrant and alive piece of work that the team all needs to be on top of, because that is where the work will be channeled through, and that is where the priorities for work will come from. Now, if we look at estimation, now, typically with a backlog, often you will find that top priorities are listed at the top of the backlog, but also the items that are well understood tends to be at the top of the backlog, ready to go. Now, these items that are where we do have more details about them, they will typically be able to give you some estimates around the size, the complexity, that allows for an idea on how much cost and effort would be required to complete a particular item. As an item moves up the backlog priority, the more we learn about what's involved to deliver it. Because if you think about that, if an item is still quite vague, but it does have a high priority, that means that because it's got a high priority, we will spend time to elaborate and understand more details about this item, which will enable us then to do better estimation. So the product or delivery process may give feedback on estimates of similar items that we've already delivered, and this will also help us with estimation. So as items move through the delivery cycle, you may see that another item that's about to go through is similar to something that you've already done, and that will help a great deal in estimating just how much time and effort and complexity is involved, and that will help you to size that particular item in order for the team to work on it. So I hope the estimation makes some logical sense here. Okay, and then the last element for you to consider when you apply this particular technique is that there are certain types of changes that can occur to the backlog. First of all, you've got new or changed items. So if new items are added or items are changed, they are reprioritized relative to all the other items on the backlog. Work capacity and availability. So once work capacity is available, items are moved from the backlog considering dependencies between items, the current understanding of the item size, and the complexity. So that's another type of change to the backlog. And then finally, we've got when do we actually remove items from the backlog? So there's two situations when things get removed. And firstly, it's when they're being worked on. So when they are basically being delivered, they are moved into the delivery of the backlog or out of the backlog into the delivery stream. And then, of course, when people decide, hey, we are actually not going to do this item on the backlog for whatever reason, and then it will be removed from the backlog. Now, keep in mind that removed items can also be re-added. For example, stakeholders change their minds. It might be more time consuming than estimated. Other priorities items could take longer to complete than estimated, and the resulting work product might have defects, which means we have to add more items to the backlog to get the work done. Okay, so considering all of those elements, that gives you an idea of what the scope is of the backlog and what backlog management includes. So always important for you and your team to have an idea of how are we going to manage the backlog items. And these elements gives you a nice guideline for how you could do that. Now, when is it a good idea to use a backlog? So what are the strengths of this technique? It's a great way to align stakeholder priorities to delivery priorities. It's a fantastic communication tool as well between the stakeholder group as well as the delivery team, because it's such a visual way. Only items at the top of the backlog are elaborated and focused on. So everybody knows what we're focusing on. It's not as if somebody is working on something that's actually not that relevant. Everybody is very much focused on what these priorities will be, and everybody puts their attention to that. So that's very good for that particular aspect of team focus. And then it's an effective way to communicate priorities. So everybody can see what we need to work on and what the priorities are. So what are the limitations then of this technique? Look, it can become quite large and cumbersome if it's a huge effort with lots of work items, and that will involve quite a lot of close management. So that can become a bit too much. it takes experience to break down the work into enough detail so that you can do accurate estimation. And a lack of detail on items in the backlog can lead to a loss of information over time. So what that means is that maybe somebody just put a card on for a certain module to be developed, but because it wasn't a high priority, this got put in medium priority for quite a long time. And by the time you're ready to elaborate, you have to backtrack to go and work out what is this card or what is this item really about. So that could be a limitation, a bit of a time-wasting exercise because you've lost the information that you may have had when that particular card was raised. Okay, so over to you as always. So what I would like you to do, if you haven't signed up to the group, as I said before, go to baexcellence.com, but otherwise participate in our Facebook group. Raise your questions about this topic. Ask questions of other people's experience of the backlog. Perhaps share with us, how do you prioritize your backlog? And what examples can you share? Yes, that would be wonderful. People all around the world may be using this technique in slightly different ways. And then the most important, because this is why we are here, what do you think we should know in order for us to answer the questions in the exam about the backlog technique? Right, so thank you once again. It's been wonderful to speak to you about this technique, and I look forward to sharing some more techniques with you in the coming weeks. Have a great day.